Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute is the world's, certainly the U.S.'s oldest private technological university, meaning we educate students in science, engineering, architecture, management, and humanities, arts, and social sciences, but with a particular focus on engineering and science. I was on a general trajectory that had to do with science research, and then moving along to begin to move into other areas. And so I find it a privilege to educate the next generation. 5.5 years. We have roughly 8,000 students. We have 5,000 undergraduates, roughly 2,000 full-time graduate students, and then we have students in a number of other professional and distance education programs. It's in Troy, New York, which is 10 miles northeast of Albany, New York. Well, I think my Board of Trustees compensates me at a level that it feels is commensurate with the responsibilities I have, but more appropriately with what the university has been able to accomplish since my tenure began. In fact, operating under a plan which we call simply the Rensselaer Plan, which we developed my first year, we have some amazing things going on. We call it a veritable renaissance at Rensselaer. We've hired a number of new faculty, really talented young people, as well as some established leaders in their fields. We've created new academic programs, new research initiatives, and we've had a concomitant growth in research volume. We've had a particular focus in biotechnology research, which is not an area where the university was known historically. We have a fairly massive, for us, building program, over $400 million in capital projects. And we've just launched publicly a $1 billion capital campaign, toward which we've already raised over $600 million. That's correct. It was a $360 million unrestricted gift where the donor wishes to remain anonymous, and we are honoring those wishes. And what is the beauty of the gift is that it is unrestricted. The donor does wish to remain anonymous, and at the time it was the largest single gift to a U.S. college or university. Well, this donor indicated that the donor believed in the Rensselaer Plan and what we were trying to do, in our early accomplishments, and in the leadership of the Institute, and wanted to make an investment that would help to secure the long-term future, as well as animate the plan and allow us to move forward on it. Well, in fact, it wasn't that we exactly heard, because it was a gift that was solicited and negotiated by me. Actually, I think the appropriate way of thinking about it is to articulate and to realize potential. The potential of a university, but more importantly, of the people within it, the young people we educate and the faculty who educate them. And therefore, a president's job in raising money is to animate and to realize that kind of a capability. And so I enjoy it in that sense. And I've been pretty good at it, so it's fun. Well, it's the title of my PhD thesis, as I'm sure you probably know by now. But it really refers to looking at particles colliding at high energy and having what we call peripheral interactions where there's very little force or momentum transfer, but where there are successive interactions, and that's why it's multi-peripheral, successive peripheral interactions. And the cross-channel unitarity is a kind of due to the application of a kind of conservation law that allows one to bound the problem in a statistical way. Well, probably not until I was applying to college, to be honest with you. I knew I was interested in math and science, and it was my high school vice principal. Now, in those days, interestingly enough, we had a high school vice principal for girls and a vice principal for boys. And it was the vice principal for boys who suggested that I think about and apply to MIT. That was at Roosevelt High School here in Washington, D.C. I had a great time. I was my high school valedictorian. I had been in an accelerated program. I loved the courses. I loved the teachers. But I've always enjoyed school. But in addition, I lived kind of an idyllic life. My parents worked hard, and they always believed very strongly in education. And I loved the kinds of things that I got to do, even though I had grown up in an environment that was segregated in terms of schooling early on, desegregated, and then had slowly begun to change back to de facto resegregation in a certain sense as I was leaving high school. My dad worked for the post office. He started in the mailroom, was a letter carrier, and ended up as a supervisor of motor vehicle operations for the post office here in Washington. My mother was a caseworker for the Department of Human Services here in Washington, D.C. But at an earlier stage, she actually taught, and during World War II, she worked in a factory in Newark, New Jersey. I have two sisters. I had a brother who passed away 20 years ago. My two sisters are very good friends of mine. One of them lives in California, and one of them lives in the Washington area. Well, my younger sister, who lives in Northern Virginia, is an attorney, and she works for the government, for the National Labor Relations Board. And my older sister is also in education. She is vice president for student life at a college in California. It's called Holy Names University. I think my parents, pretty bright people and hardworking, but they also had a very big focus on the power of education to change lives, to create opportunity. And I think we got that from our parents. And my mother taught all of us to read before we went to kindergarten. She reads a lot herself. My father was more mechanically minded and had abilities in math, although he had less formal education than my mother. Oh, it was a long time ago. I think I was probably in upper elementary school, middle school, what we call junior high school here. And the whole quote is, aim for the stars so that you reach the treetops, and at any rate you'll get off the ground. And his essential message was, if you don't aim high, you won't go far. And that was a lesson he taught us all the time. Probably as I made the transition from elementary school to junior high school, because an accelerated program, a tracking program, had been put into place in Washington, D.C. We were tested in the 6th grade and then placed in advanced tracks in junior high school. And I ended up in that accelerated program, the so-called honors program at the time. And then I really enjoyed that and started moving ahead. At the same time, there was a lot more emphasis on science and math at that point in time that came about as the result of the launch of the Sputnik satellite and so forth, and later the space race. And I took advantage of that. My education was transformed as a consequence of that and the Brown versus Board of Education decision, which desegregated the public schools. Well, what it did was I think it opened up a broader spectrum. I think it created the opportunity to compete with people across all ethnic backgrounds and races. And I think it created confidence for me, but it was also just fun to compete with others who were as interested in science and math and like things as I was. It was at the Barnard School, which is about 3 blocks from where I grew up in Northwest Washington. Prior to that, we had to go past that school to what's called the Parkview School, which was a few miles away. It was not a distance we could walk. There was no real transportation. So the fathers in the neighborhood created a kind of a carpool to take the kids to school. Well, I had a couple of teachers who did that, but one stands out. Her name is Mrs. Marie Smith. I still call her Mrs. today. I actually saw her recently at my high school reunion. She really took me under her wing. She was my math teacher, and I had her for several years, essentially for all of the math I had in high school. And she did an excellent job both with the formal teaching in the class, but spending a lot of time out of class, just talking with me about math, working on different math problems, and encouraging me to follow my interests. Another was my Latin teacher, Mrs. Davenport. I actually studied Latin for 6 years through middle school or junior high school and and high school. And I love that, and it taught me a lot in the way of vocabulary, the structure of languages. I don't know why I've always been interested in those things, but I have been. Well, I think it has a role. I would say, particularly at an early stage, to help students understand the structure of language, because it is the root of Romance languages. I think it's a useful background if one then later chooses to study Spanish or French. It helps to develop vocabulary, very strong vocabulary, and a sense of grammar and sentence construction. And so I think it's very useful in that sense. I've studied German. I've studied French. I'm better at reading languages than speaking languages. What is a semiconductor? It is a material which conducts electricity under certain conditions. If you put energy into it in some way, heat it up, put it in an electric field, shine light on it, it can begin to conduct. Because it then doesn't conduct under other circumstances, it can be used, particularly in systems where you need kind of a switching effect. All a diluted magnetic semiconductor is that one puts in something like iron, some kind of magnetic atom, into the general mix with other semiconductor atoms, and it then changes the properties and makes the system responsive to magnetic fields as well as electric fields. That's all. When you put applying an electric field means just putting a voltage on something. I taught a graduate seminar on the optical and electronic properties of layered materials and what we call semiconductor heterostructures, and I can explain that if you're interested. But I also taught basic physics courses to early undergraduates, etc. I probably was interested in science pretty early on when I was in elementary school. I got interested in bumblebees and collecting them, but more interested in why they behaved the way they did and how their environments influenced how they behaved. I was never particularly interested in a dead insect collection. I was more interested in live bees. My backyard, we had little bushes and flowers in the backyard that the bees liked, and so I would just go out initially and just watch them. And then after a time I would think about plucking the petal of the flower with the bee inside, and then I would drop it into a mason jar. And then I would, sometimes I captured them with the jar. And then I would mix them with wasps, yellow jackets, and then the traditional bumblebees to see how they interacted with each other and how they behaved according to what they were fed, how much light exposure they had, etc. Well, like many living things, if something living is imprisoned long enough, it tends to become lethargic. Its diet can change how it behaves. If it's aggressive initially, if it's in the dark, it tends to be quiescent. Different things. Well, I got more interested in math and looking at Boolean algebra, namely algebra based on the binary system as opposed to the decimal system. Did some projects in that regard, and I think that began to really move me along the line. Interestingly enough, physics was not what I necessarily thought that I might do. I was originally more interested in mathematics and classical languages. I think the languages because of having studied Latin, and mathematics because I just loved the beauty of it, as well as what it could allow you to do in understanding the physical world. Well, I was called the brainiac from time to time, but because I was in this honors curriculum, I had other classmates who were accelerated with me, and we had very small classes. We had some classes that had as few as 10 students, and so we were very good friends. We actually, the women, formed a social club. We called ourselves the Teens of Personality. and so we would meet once a week. We had club meetings and talk about different things that were on our minds. We did little projects, and then we had parties. But the interesting thing about it is that most of us were also in the same classes together. So we studied together as well as socialized. Well, one of them is a statistician for the government. One owns her own business, a Hallmark card franchise. One is a psychologist. A few of them became teachers, and so on. Well, we just so happened to have just had a little bit of a reunion when we had our high school reunion a few weeks ago. And then there are one or two of them that I'm in touch with on a regular basis. And they've tended to show up at important moments in my life. They showed up when I got married. They showed up when I was sworn in at the NRC. They showed up when I was inaugurated as president of Rensselaer. And so they've been a great support and good friends throughout my life. I was chairman between 1995 and 1999. Well, I got a call one day from the White House, is the actual story, and I was told that I was being considered for a presidential appointment, and I ended up coming down to Washington for a series of interviews, and in the end was offered a position on the commission, and then a little later interviewed again in the White House and offered the chairship of the commission. Now, in New Jersey, I had been on the board of a nuclear utility company that owned or co-owned 3 nuclear power plants. I chaired for a time the Nuclear Oversight Committee. I got involved with the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, which was an industry group formed in the aftermath of 3 Mile Island to boost the performance of the commercial nuclear industry. And then I also had gotten involved with science, technology, and economic development in New Jersey through membership on the New Jersey Commission on Science and Technology. So I think all of these things brought me to the fore in terms of a scientist with interests in the nexus of science, technology, and public policy, science, technology, and business, plus the specific background and activities in the nuclear arena. And my PhD is in a field known as elementary particle physics, and it basically is an outgrowth of nuclear physics. No, I had not been involved in any political campaign of any kind. Yes, because I had gotten very interested in nuclear power generally, always liked and fascinated by the technology, became very aware by being on the board of the utility company and a whole set of issues about energy and energy within a business context, but also energy diversity and diversity of supply, and the public policy issues having to do with the safe use of nuclear power. I worked for Bell Labs between 1976 and 1991, and then I went over and became a professor of physics at Rutgers University between 91 and when I went to the NRC. Now, during the years I was at Rutgers, I also was a consultant in theoretical physics at Bell Labs. Well, basically a continuation of the kind of work in condensed matter physics that I had been doing before, and that was the springboard to the kind of work I did at Rutgers and had students working on, so it all worked together. In fact, I kept my office at Bell Labs. Well, I think you have to step back and provide a context. First of all, it's not unusual for university presidents to serve on corporate boards, and one has to ask, why might that be important? And it's important because, one, it is the role of a president to project the university to the outside world, into the larger corporate community, and for a technological university, that's very important. Secondly, one gets to obviously participate in general discussions about business strategy and business trends, about where technologies are going in the corporate sense, in the business arena, and their application and accessibility to the public. That's important for informing what goes on in an educational institution. Again, particularly one which is rooted in science and engineering. So all of those things are very important. So they actually play naturally into what a president's responsibilities are. But I also am a very organized person. I'm a person who can multitask, and I enjoy doing it. And so for me, that's enjoyment when others may choose to do other things. Not a lot, but I get my rest. Typically 5 a.m. Typically 6 to 7, as long as it takes, but typically 7, 8, 9, 10, Depends, because it's not just being in the office. There's meetings that, of course, one has with a variety of different university constituencies and members of the community, but one does things in the larger community. There are events, there are dinners one attends, there are dinners and events one hosts, all of these things. I attend athletic events, I meet with students, I go to their activities as much as I can. I particularly like athletic events. And I meet with student leaders, faculty leaders, etc. Well, it's hard to pick a particular time because I do enjoy what I do all day long, believe it or not. The morning is always good because it's a new day, and I'm more of a morning person. And so one has the chance to think about what one may do all day long and what might come out of what one does all day. But the end of the day is nice as well because one can think back on what's going on and relax a little bit. Emma Willard is a girls' independent school in Troy, New York. It's older actually than Rensselaer, and it's an excellent high-end institution, and it's had some very well-known graduates. And it's very important. If I say that I believe and feel it is important to have women educated at the highest levels, and of course I'm particularly interested in the role of women in science, but that's not all of what Emma Willard is about. It has a broad-based curriculum. I think it's important. And I mentioned to you earlier, I think part of the privilege of being a university president is about educating the next generation. But I think we at the university are on the receiving end of what comes out of our school system, be it public or private. And so I think it's very important to be engaged, to understand the issues, to understand the development of young people, and in fact to contribute back in terms of what is going on in the middle and high school levels for young women and how that plays into what happens at the collegiate level. About 25 to 26% on the undergraduate level and 30 to 32 on the graduate level. It's changed a little bit, but not enough. And so we're giving particular focus to looking at how to do a more effective job of recruiting young women and making the case, because I think it's very important for the future of this country. Well, several things. One is to talk about the beauty, frankly, of science, the intellectual and inherent interest and all the kind of neat things one can study and do in studying science and engineering. Secondly, I make the case of the kinds of careers that one can aspire to and in fact have in areas that people might not think about, including in entertainment. And third, I make the point of the importance of it to be able to help people. And I think many young people and many women are particularly interested in that, and to help solve the world's problems. And fourth, I talk about the fact that great industries and great fortunes have been made that are rooted in science and technology. Well, let's take any number of them. Let's take Toy Story. Animation, visualization, simulation. That's very sophisticated in terms of the ability to do computations, the application of computer science, particular kinds of engineering, to be able to create these sorts of animated films. That same kind of work is also important in things like healthcare, in medicine. It also happens to be important in things that relate to security. So you have an opportunity to contribute across a broad spectrum, but it can just be fun. Well, we have a game studies major. We have a major called electronic media arts and communications. We have a major in electronic arts. All of these things sit at the nexus of technology and the arts. And they span a spectrum from what I've described a minute ago to the use of new technologies in performance. There are majors like product design and innovation, which marry engineering with management. We have a big focus at Rensselaer on entrepreneurship, the creation of new enterprises, and students have the opportunity to take their ideas which may come out of the classroom or out of the lab or the design studio and actually create a business. We operate one of the nation's oldest university-based business incubators. In fact, we operate 3. We have one on the campus, one in downtown Troy, and one in a nearby town called Watervliet, which is across the Hudson River from us. It means just that. If you think about incubation, you take a fledgling enterprise and you nurture it. And in the case of a business incubator, one is nurturing the enterprise by helping to provide business acumen. It can range from development of business plans to just providing relatively low-cost space as a company gets its feet under it, to providing access to venture networks so that companies can get early round venture funding to begin to move along. And we also operate a technology park, 1,200-acre technology park, and some of the companies have graduated from the incubator into the technology park, but they don't all do. Some of them go off and just become enterprises on their own. Well, I think they would say a kind of a combined statement that I bring a very good business perspective and understanding, but that is married with a strong science and technology and academic perspective. And that coupled with the regulatory background as well, they find it useful, particularly in these days when governance is very important and so on. I tend to focus on ethics, on risk assessment, and on understanding the broader business environment that the company plays into. But I also tend to have a specific focus on areas that relate to governance and control functions and so on. The fact that I look at whether the CEO projects an image and a belief in high integrity, operates that way, and how that propagates in the company as much as I understand, and how that affects how the board itself operates. I look at the other board members and who they are, not just from the point of view of the positions they hold, but what kind of people are they? More than I care to discuss. I don't keep track of them, but I've been asked to serve on many boards. I mean, I served on boards before I went into the government. I was on 5 boards then, and I gave them up to do what I did. And I've given up boards that I used to be on, and then there are any number of others. And so I just, in general, decline inquiries at this point. I do it for a couple of reasons. First of all, I enjoy commencements because they are just that. They are a launching point for young people into the next phases of their lives, into their careers, into graduate schools. Secondly, I always get a thrill in watching the parents, the families, and how proud they are. Third, I learn things in terms of how other universities do things, what their cultures are. Fourth, it's always a thrill to interact with the others who are being honored, because these are very prominent, accomplished people, and it's very interesting to get to know them. So these are some of the reasons I enjoy it. And finally, if I'm able to be a role model of sorts or a model of any kind for the young people who are graduating, however fleetingly, I think that's as well important. My philosophy of commencement speeches, well, to talk about those things that I value: excellence, leadership, community, making a difference, understanding the world, and applying one's education to that end. I'd say those are general themes, but they're actually tailored to the audience. I very seldom repeat exactly, well, I never repeat exactly one speech with another. I may use some themes from a speech I've given before, but that makes it challenging for me and for those who work with me. Well, we have a range, and it ranges from roughly the middle 50%, from roughly 1,200 to about 1,420. The average is about 1,320, but it's higher in certain areas than others, higher in engineering and science. Top being 1,600, but we have, in the top 25%, the range is basically 14 to 1600. Of course, I mean, we look at the total record. We look at what students have studied. We look at their motivation, their focus. We look at their other activities. We're particularly interested in those who exhibit leadership, those who feel they want to take science or what they learn and make a difference. Rensselaer was founded to educate those who would apply science to the common purposes of life. And so you could say we look for that as we evaluate students. And of course, we look at how they overall, we think, would both benefit from and contribute to the Rensselaer community. About 25%. I think it's, you know, about average. We've been working to focus on our juniors who look like they have a lot of potential, to encourage them to continue. Well, you'd probably say around, not counting travel and so forth, around $40,000. But that is not the true cost, because many, in fact, most of our students have some form of financial aid, at least 85% of them. And so the effective cost is about half that. But as you probably know, even the full nominal cost only covers a third to a half of what it actually costs to educate a young person. Yes, we do. About $90 million. It depends on what one wants to compare oneself to. I mean, if one compares oneself to the very large state universities or MIT or universities that have major medical centers, then it's a relatively small amount of money. But something that's on the order of $90 to $100 million compared to smaller research universities is not bad. Our goal is to move up to somewhere between $150 to $200 million. It's about $600 million at this point. Well, I met my husband in a physics seminar at Bell Labs. I was in my first month at the lab, and he had just been there a few weeks. I was literally in a physics seminar, and the door opened and this young man came in. His name is Morris Washington. About 4 years after we met, 1980. He's a very nice man. He's nicer than I am. He's very family focused. He has done an excellent job with our son. They were together in New Jersey as I commuted back and forth to the NRC during my son's high school years. And so they spent a lot of time together. What does my husband do? He too is a physicist. He is associate director of one of the engineering centers at Rensselaer, and he teaches in the physics department. He's 23. He works in New York City for an outdoor advertising agency, and he's looking at going to graduate school in law and business, Dartmouth College. Well, I don't know that it was different in a fundamental way. We probably had more means, my husband and I, and then with one child, we probably were able to do more in certain material senses. Our son went K through 12 through an independent school. I'm a public school product, as is my husband. But in terms of fundamental values and focus on education and family, they're about the same. Our son was a swimmer. He was captain of his swim team in high school, and he also was a water polo player. And so these were kind of different activities than ones I had in high school, but we kept him busy and we supported what he did. He was a peer leader. He sang in the men's a cappella group, and he played clarinet in the school orchestra. So he was a busy young man, but a very nice young man. No, not money per se. I think, you know, one wants to be able to live reasonably well. One wants to be able to provide and be a partner with one's husband, to provide for one's family, and to launch our son, and then to, of course, provide for our retirement. And so I'm not particularly money motivated. I think the board at Rensselaer feels that it wants to compensate me in a way that's commensurate with the responsibilities I have, but more appropriately with what has been accomplished for Rensselaer during my tenure. I think it's important, but what I find, which might surprise you, I think, is that I think young people, the ones we see, and the ones we have at Rensselaer really want to make a difference. They want to use the science to do things that matter to people. We also have a very strong ROTC program. And so our young people believe in service to the country as well. And so we have a fair number of them who end up going off not only to be in the military, but to work for the government. And so it's across the spectrum, because obviously we have a number who go to work in big companies. But I also think young people, depending upon how they grew up in their own family circumstance, are very interested in financial stability and to be able to provide for their families as well. And so there is a spectrum. And some are willing to take more risks and develop a business enterprise, and we have a lot of those. But then there are others who believe very strongly in service, and they go that route. About 3,000 employees. Well, the NRC is the agency of the U.S. government that's responsible primarily for licensing and regulating the civilian uses of nuclear energy. But that ranges from the oversight of commercial nuclear power reactors to research reactors in universities and industry and medicine, to the licensing and oversight of the transportation, storage, and disposal of radioactive waste, particularly high-level waste, but also low-level waste, although some of that is delegated to the states. Responsible for some aspects of uranium mining and uranium conversion and fuel fabrication. And the NRC happens to be the licensing and export control agency for the U.S. government for the export of nuclear materials and technology for peaceful purposes. I believe in nuclear power. I think it's important to have diversity of supply for nuclear and for energy security generally. And I think nuclear is an important part of that. And I believe then one has to have a range of technologies, because the world's energy demand is only getting greater, and the call on fossil fuels is getting to be greater and greater. And so we're not the only country that aspires to have a certain standard of living, but we want to maintain our standard of living. Well, the NRC is an agency that has to balance the interests. It has a fundamental responsibility to protect the public, the protection of the public's health and safety, as well as responsibilities vis-a-vis the common defense and security. But at the same time, it is there to license and oversee a commercial nuclear industry that should be vibrant. Well, I think today, to be honest, it's not that we have a crisis today. I mean, we still are the world's leader in scientific and technological capability. Still the world's leader in innovation that comes from that. And so one doesn't want to shout fire in the movie theater. But the real point has to do with signs and trends that could lead to a potential erosion. First of all, our success model is not lost on the rest of the world. And so other nations are racing to emulate our model. Now, we are, I think, and have been unique for a long time with our scientific and engineering capacity for innovation, and the marriage of that with the capital markets and access to capital to bring it all to reality. But as I said, this is not lost on other countries. So other countries are racing to elevate the education of their people, to train many more people in science and engineering, and to invest in their own R&D capacities. So now you play that off against the fact that our own science and engineering workforce is aging. Half the workforce in the U.S. government, particularly in these fields, can begin to retire in the next 4 years. NASA is one example where, as of testimony of about a year ago, the number of people at NASA who are age 60 and over outnumber those who are age 30 and younger by 3 to 1. So that's one sign. A second, fewer international students are coming to this country than used to come to this country. For the first time, there are really measurable drops in the number of graduate students, and depending upon whose survey one sees, it's somewhere between about 2.5 to maybe 6%. But it's the first time in about 30 years. Now that's important because if you look at the who makes up the science and engineering workforce in this country with advanced degrees, 40% of them are foreign born. And so those kinds of trends are not unimportant. Third, U.S. domestic students, American-born students, are less interested in science. The numbers haven't grown, and in many ways they've dropped. And they've certainly dropped in a relative sense compared to other industrialized nations. And on a relative basis, our kids don't do so well in international competitions in science and math. And so all of this is happening when massive fortunes are being made based on science and technology, when great advances in basic science knowledge are occurring, and when there are great breakthroughs that have importance for human health and welfare. This is happening. And of course, there are the visa issues. And the visa issues are important, obviously, because they affect the flow of talent from abroad, talent that we've depended upon and still do. But it also is part of a larger picture of the ease of interaction with the larger global scientific community. But I'm not saying that there's an immediate crisis, but it takes years to produce a high-quality scientist or engineer with advanced degrees. And all of this is happening as we are not attracting our own young people. And what's been hidden in all of this discussion is what I call the underrepresented majority, namely women and underrepresented minorities. And the demographics of the country are changing. And so if we don't create strategies and a national will to reach all the young people and tap the total talent pool and to tap those who would do science, then 15, 20 years down the line, we may find ourselves in a different place. And that's really the message here. Well, first of all, to have public support of science requires public understanding of science. So I think a whole thrust toward public understanding of science, science broad literacy, I think is important. We know what works in many instances to excite, to nurture young people. What it requires is a real national leadership, national focus to create a national will to reignite the interests of the country and to attract talented young people from all backgrounds into the possibilities of science, and to just have people understand science at a level that helps to inform their own comfort levels and their own decision making with respect to science. We also need to ensure that we continue to support our higher education institutions at a level that is commensurate with the contribution they make. I mean, many public universities are looked to in the areas where they are to be engines of regional economic growth. But as you know, there's been a shifting in the relative proportion of public support for public universities. Private universities have always existed in a universe of depending upon private philanthropy and the management of their own assets. But the work they do that relates to advancement of science and technology comes out of public support in the form of federal support for basic research in universities, with concomitant support from the states in some cases, but from private enterprise. How globally linked we are, and the role of technology in that global linkage and the ability to move high-end critical things around the world. So it's all part of the kind of just-in-time way we have to do certain things. The importance of our telecommunications infrastructure and the importance of maintaining the capability to keep that up. What can happen when you marry engineering, the physical sciences, and the computational sciences with the life sciences to create biomedical breakthroughs and devices that can prolong people's lives and improve their lives. What I learned from the MIT board is it's the prime example of what it means to provide a high-end technological education, to be of service to the country in terms of what one does for the government, and to educate the global workforce. What happens when one doesn't try to do everything, but focuses well? Biomedical research, physics, particularly theoretical physics, and mathematics. Well, you know, I go to the meetings. I'm not there every day, but what I learned from that experience are two things. One is it's important to have a forum and a focused institution on important policy issues of the day. But I also learned what major accomplished people think across the political spectrum on those major issues of the day. Well, the business world is about translating ideas and inventions and things into enterprise that not only helps to change people's lives, but can create prosperity and jobs. The government is about service to the larger nation. Academia is about creating the future through the education of young people and through the basic research that goes on at major research universities. I read fiction, but not science fiction. I read biographies. I read general policy things. And then I'm just a readaholic. So I read in the end newspapers of all kinds. I also like hiking in the mountains.